And I think I'll go ahead and start with the introduction. Looks like we have a full audience here, so I want to be respectful of your time. Welcome, everyone, to Skills That Scale, Apprenticeships, Internships, and Ecosystem Solutions for Advanced Manufacturing and Tech. My name is Robert Wyman. I'm Director of Workforce Innovation here at the National Institute for Industry and Career Advancement, which I'll refer to as NIICA, and I'll be moderating today's panel. This session is part of NIICA's Workforce Education, Career, and Apprenticeship Network, or WECAN, which brings together employers, educators, and workforce leaders to share solutions and drive action. At NIICA, our focus is very clear. It's building structured, scalable talent pipelines for industries critical to U.S. competitiveness and security, and that includes advanced manufacturing, semiconductors, and broader tech economy. The challenge we're addressing today is one that many of you know firsthand, and that's the demand for skilled workers, which continues to grow, and traditional approaches to training and hiring just can't keep up. Apprenticeships and internships are powerful tools to close that gap, but they're most effective when integrated with emerging practices like skills-based hiring and technologies like digital twins that transform how people learn and practice before they step onto the shop floor. Today, you'll hear from experts who are not just talking about solutions, but are actively implementing them. First off, we have Clay Nagel, who is Senior Director of NIICA's National Center for Skills-Based Learning, who brings decades of experience leading technical training for global manufacturers, including Global Foundries and Hewlett-Packard. Second, we have Dr. Jared Ashcroft. He is Principal Investigator at the Micro Nanotechnology Education Center and is a chemistry professor at Pasadena City College, who is shaping national strategies for microelectronics education and expanding access to STEM pathways. Last, we have Isai Pakhter. He is Senior Account Executive at Tap3D, whose work with immersive VR and simulation-based training is reducing onboarding time and accelerating skills development in manufacturing. Together, today, we'll explore where apprenticeships, internships, and complementary models fit in today's workforce strategy, and how employers, educators, and ecosystem partners can collaborate together to align to scale these solutions. Quick note before we dive in, we won't be taking any live questions during this event, but if you'd like to continue the conversation, whether to explore partnership opportunities or learn more about NIICA's work and our partnerships, please reach out to us at info@niica.org, and our team will follow up. With that, let's go ahead and get started. So to kick this off, and I know this is tough for this audience here, but in a minute or less, in advanced manufacturing, this will be for each of the speakers here, the same question. In advanced manufacturing and tech, why do earn and learn models like registered apprenticeships, internships, and pre-apprenticeships matter right now? What do they deliver that traditional hiring or pre-employment training programs do not? And just with a little bit of lens on that, given the capacity of our current workforce systems and growing labor shortage, what can we do differently now to set up these approaches for true national scale? So I'm going to hand this to Jared first. You're going to put you right on the spot there, Jared.
All right, no, thanks. That's a great question. I'm a believer in student-centric opportunities. How do we put the students first? And I think the one thing that earn and learn models, internships, apprenticeships, they're always putting students first. How can we support them in getting awareness of what the semiconductor industry is? How can we get them a little bit of a training before they get those job interviews? How can we help them get ready for job interviews? For our program, we definitely focus a little bit more on internships than apprenticeships with the Micro Nanotechnology Education Center. And really our sole focus or biggest focus is how do we bring more students to this workforce pipeline? And so to me, the big thing with internships, particularly and apprenticeships, is it's going to create a mechanism where we can get a student-centric approach that can focus on getting awareness and recruiting more students into the pipeline, and with eventual hope that they're going to end up into those apprenticeships on the back end or jobs once they complete what our internships provide.
And Clay, I'd love to pass it to you because I know you have the perspective of both working in education and in industry. So same question.
Yeah, well, obviously everything that Jared just said. I particularly like it because, internships, apprenticeships, I it focuses on skill-based learning, right? So the actual skills that are required for the job, for that particular employer, right? So that's a big deal. And when you're talking about doing it in an earn and learn model, it widens the pipeline of individuals that can enter that workforce. And I don't want to dive too far into it because I know we're going to have deeper discussion about this in a little bit, but that's key for someone who was responsible for making sure that people were, trained and ready to do the job. Being able to expose individuals early on to the skills that are required for the job in a very structured format is super important. I'll leave it there.
Awesome. Thank you, Clay. And then Esai, so you folks have brought a lot of innovation into learning, especially in the space of like learning new manufacturing facilities and learning new equipment. So love to hear your response to that first question too, is like, and that again, that focus on what can we do differently now that allows these approaches to scale.
To concur everything that Clay and Jared said, right? There's truly a war for talent, right? And how do you reduce those obstacles for that talent, for those students, make it more about them and giving them those opportunities? And as Jared and Clay mentioned, creating that exposure, creating that awareness, how do you do that in the easiest way for them possible? And this technology allows it, where you really bring those opportunities to them, give them that exposure, really give them an idea and a pathway in that skills trade way to doing it, as opposed to forcing them to get a longer path, make a larger investment ahead before they actually get those opportunities.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what I heard from the three of you, if I was going to throw it together in one sentence or like a fragmented sentence, is that number one, we put it student centric, right? We're really focusing on the student, or what I refer to as a talent. And we're introducing skills that are directly related to job performance and future career potential. And then really is giving them that low risk in a VR environment is a good example of early exposure to skills so that they can gain that confidence and see how it directly correlates to the job. So I really appreciate that. It's great framework for us to kind of really kick off this conversation. Dr. Ashcroft, I'm going to call you Jared from now on, but Dr. Ashcroft, just wanted to hit you with this question here is you've worked for a long time at the intersection of education and industry. How do you see community colleges specifically playing a unique role in scaling workforce pipelines for advanced manufacturing and obviously for micro nanotechnologies?
Yeah, I mean, and I think community colleges have a vital role. I think there's two different parts that we have to focus on. We need to train students that can become technicians that go directly from an associate's degree or a certificate to placement into those semiconductor jobs once they finish in 1 or 2 years. And at the same time, we also need to be able to focus on, hey, there's a transfer pathway. And if we see really talented engineers or someone who's really dedicated and wants to become a semiconductor engineer, we need to be able to provide opportunities and content to those students that can equally support them as supporting our technician-based students. But to me, the biggest role that community colleges have is I think it's easier for us to get the students into a hands-on environment, right? It's easier for us to get faculty who have probably worked in industry or who have done these hands-on activities in the past, working directly with the students. Where the four-year universities, I think their strength is research and development, creating these big ideas. And I think if we can really focus those community colleges on that technician workforce pipeline, focusing on hands-on skills, getting them a little bit of clean room access, working with them to get them ready for those apprenticeships or for those internships so that the students don't feel overwhelmed when they start like either an industry or a university internship, I think that's where we can have a big sort of support system for these students.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really appreciate that. And I think that kind of aligns with what you said about student centric is that there is going to be a large percentage of your students that are really well fitted for an associate's degree and into employment. There's also a select group of those individuals that we want to create a nice pathway for them to get their full potential as engineers, right? So they can continue as subject matter experts, as technicians, or they can continue to that 4-year degree. One thing I just wanted to point out there, I think, is some flexibility within that associate's degree, especially is, are there on and off ramps for them? And I think with apprenticeships and internships, that's what we're discovering is they can continue with that degree, but really immerse into that work-based learning environment, whether that be an internship or apprenticeship, so they can start to identify early on, what are the skills I need, and is this a space that I'm interested in? Where can I thrive in this industry? That being said, I'm going to go to virtual reality environment with Esai. TAP 3D has shown measurable impacts like reducing time to contribution. I want you to explain what that means specifically, and boosting skill development. From your work, what does this look like in practice for employers? What does the VR and also digital twins really bring to the playing field here?
Yeah, and as Jared said, hands-on learning, and we're believers in that, right? And we're not looking to necessarily replace that hands-on. It should still be that primary way of learning, but what are those complementary tools to help accelerate it? What if there isn't the access to some of that hands-on? And that's really where this virtual reality technology can really come in. And we, along with everyone else here, we want to have these trainees and talent be ready on day one, not be ready, job ready on one day, but be ready on day one. So how can the virtual reality do this? Right? When you ask the question regarding time to contribution, we have worked directly with industry partners. We have trained over 4,000 technicians for their onboarding and upskilling directly. And that time to contribution, the way that would be defined is how quickly could these trainees become certified within the companies to work independently. And the return on investment for the companies is that who's doing that training, right? You usually have those senior technicians that are better suited to be troubleshooting and making sure the equipment is working as opposed to necessarily training someone. So if you could reduce that time by 50%, which we were able to do that, do new employee or new trainee to be certified to work independently, that was the return on investment that came in. So how did that really happen? What is the way of doing it? Well, with virtual reality, the equipment we know is very expensive and not necessarily always accessible. So how do you create that environment? Where can they work on getting that talent to expose to that tools and equipment in that safe environment? Where can someone make mistakes without repercussions? And virtual reality can take the heavy, expensive equipment that maybe training providers aren't able to afford, have access to. We use the virtual reality, have them become consistent, learn on it in a safe environment, make mistakes, gain that skill set, and as you mentioned before, gain that confidence that by the time they do get that hands-on, do get access to the equipment, they're not intimidated by it, they're very much ready, and you actually get a acceleration in that learning process because they can get through that hands-on significantly faster.
That's awesome. Thank you, Esai. So I can see Clay cringed a little bit there, having come from industry where our litho tool is short of a little bit more than 300 million. So when I heard you say mistakes and experiment, build confidence, I thought that was really telling because Clay knows the stress of trying to train someone on some very expensive tools. 3 words that came from what you said, Esai, that I really like, and I think this is across all like learn and earn models, is exploring on how we can enhance the learning that's already out there. We have great academic programs. How can we accelerate learning? And that's like risk-free learning where they can experiment and break things, but they're not really breaking them. And the other thing is access. So we have a lot of community colleges across the nation, but not all of them are going to have the same level of access to tools. And VR and digital twins is one component where they can get that equitable access to these things. So Clay, to follow up on that, I wanted to kind of tap into your expertise from the Center of Skills-Based Learning, where you're helping design and scale strategies for skills-based hiring and learning. Can you speak a little bit about why that is important in building this nation's pipeline? Like, what is NIICA and our partner providing us to advance skills-based learning and hiring? And what role do registered apprenticeships and internships play across advanced manufacturing And what models, maybe, it's a big question, it's a loaded question for you, but what models have proved effective for that? Just kidding. There you go.
Small thing. All right. So let's just try and drill in on the skill-based hiring and learning and why it's essential. It really is essential because it directly aligns workforce development with the actual competencies that are needed in the labor market, right? So why is that so impactful? Well, first, you're closing the skills gap by engaging in skill-based hiring. You're focusing as an employer on what people can do, right? So that helps you find, as an employer, talent that meets the job requirements. And in high demand sectors like IT and advanced manufacturing, that's critical. Skill-based hiring and skill-based learning, if you're looking at it from that perspective, as I said before, you're widening the funnel of individuals who you can look at that have the skills for those gateway positions. So you can grab career changers, people who've worked in other careers and maybe they're underemployed, right? And they're looking for something new. They have skills that they've learned in a number of different ways, but now they become part of your funnel. Individuals who have followed both traditional and non-traditional education paths, right? So again, you're just widening that funnel so you have more opportunity to find the right fit for the jobs. Your skill-based learning through internships, apprenticeships, boot camps, micro-credentials, and you name it, on-the-job training, it accelerates workforce readiness, right? So individuals gain relevant skills quickly, they enter the workforce sooner, and importantly, as we mentioned earlier, they can earn while they learn. So it removes barriers. And again, it's urgent to look at it that way when you start looking at labor shortages that we're seeing, going out into 2030. And there's a lot of data on that. From an employer perspective, skill-based learning and skill-based hiring, it leads to better job performance earlier on. If we work together to build out the career paths so that they're transparent and it's all based on skills that are required for the job as you move up the ladder, and what's going to be required to gain those skills to move up, and it's clear what that path is, that lowers turnover, right? And that's good for the employees and the employer. And again, that's a big deal. So of course, skill-based learning supports lifelong learning and adaptability. So as things change over time, skill-based models encourage continuous learning and upskilling, right? So workers can evolve with whatever the industry needs are. And again, by doing that, you make your talent pipeline a little bit more resilient. And then, lastly, I would say that when the learning is driven by skills, education providers can tailor programs to meet regional and national workforce demands. And that's always going to tighten the partnership between education, industry, and, from my lips to God's ears, government policy. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I love that. So a couple things I heard there, and this kind of dovetails nicely into the next question for Jared too, is that this skills-based learning and hiring, it sounds to me like one thing that's really core to that is an analysis or a profile of the target job. And I think that's often something that is missing in our work, is that we want people to enter into these industries, but if we really explored, especially in our most immediate area where we're looking at regional strategies, how does that tie to jobs that these students are going into directly in my community, right? So, and the job ladder up from that, like what is the skills gap to get them into the gateway job, and then what is the gap to get them in the next ladder up job quickly? The other word I heard you use was resilient, and I think that's really telling too. Is that how do we create a resilient ecosystem where we're training people for jobs and careers that are in their area, but also a resilient individual too, where like they understand that continuous lifelong learning is going to be part of their jobs, leveraging and recontextualizing some of the base skills they have as they move up the ladder. Jared, I'm going to throw this in you because we're really looking at, more innovative strategies here. So, we have Isai on here as well, but I wanted to ask you a little bit because I know we've heard you in conversations really talking, with different collaborators on the opportunities in digital twins and the skills aligned with digital twins. So from your perspective, what excites you most about integrating tools like digital twins into technical education, and how do they change the way students and apprentices and interns would gain confidence before working with real equipment and industrial processes?
I think one of the huge challenges with is not all community colleges are equal in this space. We can talk about all of our great Lorain County awesome Austin Community College, great Bridgeland Tech community. Like, we have these awesome programs out there that students are getting access to in-person experts, clean rooms, people who've worked in industry before. And then I'll use my school as in Pasadena City College. At least in the semiconductor space, we don't have that expertise. We have great electronics professors. I mean, wonderful electronics professors, but they're not semiconductor specific. And so I think using digital twins and VR, especially with the TAP 3D, which we use in the AT3, our internship program, it can provide those faculty who might not be experts in specifically the semiconductor industry, who probably have never even worked in a clean room in their life and maybe have never been actually wore a bunny suit before. We could give those instructors the TAP 3D VR clean room simulation modules, and at least those students in that course could get access to theory behind it, or different processes that you're going to have to do in the clean room that you probably couldn't get access to without that digital twin or that VR workforce simulation. So the biggest, I think, benefit there is going to be access. But the really important thing is it's got to be attached to some type of other program. It can't just be VR for VR's sake, and that's all we're doing. There has to be some type of hands-on component, whether you're using wrenches, whether you're using multimeters, whether you're using tools, or if you're even going into an advanced clean room and maybe working on a boot camp for a week. There's got to be, in my opinion, a little bit better strategic, how do we use these resources more effectively and more efficiently? And to me, that takes talking with industry, talking with universities, talking with the community colleges, and like Clay says, the government agencies, on how can we sort of divvy up resources or support the entire ecosystem with the limited funding that we have. But to me, the biggest benefit of these VR and digital twin space is it's going to provide access to a lot of students who would never even know what a semiconductor or what a job in this space is without it.
Right. I'm gonna bridge on that question. One more part to that, Jared, because I know I've seen you talk about this as well. Is that so? This is an emerging competency as well, right? Working with digital twins, working with data sets. These are emerging technologies that are actually becoming a competency set required of technicians. Can you speak a little bit too of like the digital twins that we see in the research level, or like in yield of product yield and stuff like that? And where do you see that would be relevant to groups and groups and programs that are trying to prepare people for to be technicians in the workforce?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great comment. I know, we've been working with the Smart Institute on a proposal that, and as part of that proposal, we did, propose, why don't community colleges start looking at preparing the digital technicians who are going to have to be the technicians that manage or create, or just like you're doing the technicians in the fabrication facility, there's going to need to be technicians that can just manage that digital facility. So I do think, technicians who you can get to optimize it or to do whatever tasks are needed within that digital space. It's going to be sort of, I think, an up and coming and even emerging. It's already here, I think, but I think it's going to become even more important once we get more digital twins in place and they start implementing those in, optimizing their productions going forward. So that definitely is a space that community colleges need to start looking into, as digital technicians.
Awesome. And then to that point, Isai, I'm changing your original question a little bit here because I know you can stretch to this just because of your experience in this field. But so what we'll see in industry, and it's just now emerging, but it accelerates learning, but also in the industry itself, And we've talked about this. There's VR, there's augmented reality, and then there's mixed reality. I know that Tap 3D has explored that. Can you tell us a little bit of like, what does that bridge look like for like in training we do VR at the academic level and pre-training environments, but then as these technicians go into a workforce where the technology is consistently changing, how do you see them getting early introduction to these headset platforms will prepare them into a mixed reality environment where training may be delivered at the facilities where they eventually work?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Great question. I'll even take it a further step back.
Knew you
In,
would.
you have the youth of today that already are comfortable with this technology. They're
Mhm.
already using this technology in their, let's be honest, probably more in a gaming platform than anything else, but they're already on this technology. So what now, instead of using it as a gaming system, think of it more as a delivery system that you are actually providing the information you want to them in a way that they're already comfortable with. So the individuals already are comfortable with it. Now, with virtual reality, why we utilize it, because we're bringing in people that are very unfamiliar with the technology. You want to create that environment where they have that utmost focus on it, and there's plenty of research that exists out there that when you take away distractions or focal points, they're going to be able to focus significantly more. So the research suggests that if you learn something in a class or if you read something in a book, you're going to retain about 30% of it. If you learn it in a classroom because you hear it and see it, you're going to retain in the 50 percentile. But with virtual reality, you actually can increase it into the 70 percentile because you remove a lot of the focal points. So that's why when you're teaching something brand new to someone that doesn't know very much about it, you want to use that virtual reality environment. When you're now in that workforce environment where you actually are working with specific tools on specific, let's use the semiconductor industry, where you have recipes, processes that take over 150 steps, and someone doesn't necessarily have all of those 150 steps in mind or understanding, now you're going to be working much more in an augmented or mixed reality environment because you actually have those tools in front of them. You have to work on that tool to have that hands-on, and you have that overlay that's going to guide you more so to fix the problem and do the troubleshooting, as opposed to really learning something brand new that you can make mistakes in. In an AR environment, you have to work on the actual tool, get that hands-on, and be touching it with that overlay on it. So you're just extending that technology. To answer your question, that technology is just an extension to itself that you want to create that comfort level from the very beginning. And like I said, the youth of today already are regaining that confidence and comfort level with the technology and the way they use it.
Yeah, that's awesome because I think what we see both in the academic world and also in the workforce world is as production increases and as workforce need continues to increase, capacity to train is a limiting factor. So at the academic level, it's like finding the faculty to train, larger cohorts of students and do it where it's compatible with a learn and earn model. Finding classroom space with the proper equipment are capacity issues that community colleges will be faced with as the workforce demand accelerates. We also hear this from employers who would be very willing to provide adjunct faculty to these colleges, where they can provide that context of industry. The challenge is that as production increases and demand increases, they can't provide that they don't have the luxury to take those people off of production and innovation and put them in a training environment. So as we see a VR or digital twin and augmented and mixed reality, they may be ways of not to replace the trainer, but to expand the reach of that trainer and give more repetitive type training that can accelerate that learning. And that's my way of trying to pivot over to Clay on a question on this as well. So because this is something that I think is very important. The real theme of this meeting today is to talk about scaling and to talk about some of the capacity limiters that we currently have in training and getting workforce up and ready and performing. Clay, I'm going to shift a little bit here and send you back to Global Foundries to give us an employer perspective from a minute. During your time at Global Foundries, you worked closely with colleges to build strong pipelines of candidates. What approaches, partnerships, or innovations made the biggest difference in preparing students so that they would have early success in the production floor, and in other cases, they could get to that job earlier as well?
Yeah. So, you know, prior to us, starting the apprenticeship for technicians there, we sort of kind of had a non-registered program that we worked very closely with the community colleges around the location in upstate New York. And it focused on, again, the skills that were needed. So it was not putting somebody into the degree program, but aligning what would be related technical instruction in a registered apprenticeship so that the individuals were getting the on-the-job training, obviously, at work. And then we were sending them for specific classes. And it was a model for them to be able to move from a gateway position that was not like a maintenance or equipment engineering technician job to from something that wasn't that to the higher paying equipment technician job. And it really was the forerunner of what became a much more robust, with a lot more structure around it, registered apprenticeship, and now a stackable registered apprenticeship on top of that. And I think we've mentioned it a couple of times. As soon as an employer like Global Foundry starts working with community colleges on programs like that, generally from an employer perspective, I know I was not shy about saying that doesn't work for me, right? Class schedules, what the courses were there any adjustments that were needed in the content? So we were able to work very closely with the community colleges to tune what we needed into the program so that we could get real early success with individuals who were joining that gateway job. And really, until that apprenticeship existed, we at Global Founders, we didn't even really hire into the gateway position. There was the old school of thought that we're only going to hire into the laddered up position from their level 2 with somebody who had an associate's degree or comparable experience either in the industry or military experience, something that was very closely related. So it really opened up the doors to who we could hire, right? Widened the pipeline for us, but it also literally put us all in the same room, right? It was, employer and community college working very closely together to make sure there was success, because there's skin in the game for both, right? And I think that was huge. Also working directly with programs at the schools that were related to the CTE programs in the area, so that you were building almost an articulation from CTE into apprenticeship and CTE into degree program, right? So that we're starting earlier, right? Starting in the K to 12 environment, and then either bringing people in from the K to 12 environment into the apprenticeship and sending them back for related technical instruction, and maybe even hopefully degree completion at the community college, or straight from CTE into the relevant programs that we were hiring from at the community colleges anyway, right? So again, now you're getting alignment, not only employer to community college, you're getting alignment between employer, community college, and CTE program all at the same time. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, I think that was great, and it helps me out with Jared. So your employer looking, from employer perspective out to the community college system. Jared, I'm gonna bring you back looking at from, organization and within community colleges. How are you looking at the employers? And I want to emphasize kind of this concept that seems to be coming up of like, how do we ensure this deeper engagement between employers and training providers, namely community colleges. But I also see that deep engagement also has to happen with, government and community partners in an ecosystem as well, so that they all are consistently talking. And one thing that seems to come up in a learn and earn strategy, it's directly related to getting people into jobs and succeeding. And that seems to create this feedback loop or deep engagement that's consistent over time. As you go through each cohort of apprentices or interns, there's a really strong conversation between community college employers that are hosting those apprentices or interns, and then also other community partners. So the question, I gave you some context there, Jared, but like the question is for many institutions, the challenge isn't, uh, I'm sorry, that's you say. What I wanted to say is for many community colleges, here we go. They have excellent certificate and degree programs. We know this, but how can earn and learn partnerships like apprenticeship and like internship and in partnership with employers, how can that ensure curriculum, instruction, resources, and even funding stays concise and immediately relevant to gateway positions with effective career pathways?
And I think that's a great question. And I'm going to go back to what I think the real issue in this space is. It's not curriculum, it's not, content, it's not resources, it's trust. I mean, the brutal honesty is no one trusts anyone in this space, right? Like, does industry trust community colleges that they're going to come to Pasadena City College? They're going to recruit my students, and then those students are going to go on to work at a Micron or a TI. Do the community colleges trust the industry that, we develop this internship program or apprenticeship program, and then you're going to recruit from them and actually provide opportunities for those students in those programs? And to me, the biggest thing that an apprenticeship and an internship program can provide is that trust between each other, because we're all going after the common good, right? Like, I don't want to have students that I put in an internship program and an apprenticeship program, and let's just use Micron for an example. I don't want them to go to that internship at Micron or apprenticeship at Micron. They finish that internship or apprenticeship, and then Micron offers them a job, and that student says no. Like, I want that student to say yes, and I want that to happen because before they go to Micron or TI or that industry partner, I've talked to the students and say, hey, this is a great opportunity. They're providing you this opportunity, and that means something, right? And the worst thing that can happen for a community college is I send those students and Micron and TI says, yes, we're going to take them, and then the students say no. And then vice versa, the worst thing that can happen to a community college is we develop this internship program or this apprenticeship program, and we've spent the money to get it started, and then there's no opportunities on the back end, right? And so to me, it's with everybody, like universities, community colleges, industry, government, all of us talking together and having a clear trust or great conversations of, how can we work within this system together so that all of us are getting wins, right? That no one is feeling like once the program is done that, oh man, there's no satisfaction, right? Like, why did I work with Pasadena City College when none of the students started to help work with us, So to me, it's not about the content. It's not about it's about developing these apprenticeships and internships as a way for us to build a more common path or a common strategy and just common trust so that we can work together more effectively in this space. Because if we trust each other and we feel like we're all sort of in a way got each other's backs, it's going to be so much better going forward. And to me, that's the key. It's why developing these programs together is so vital. It can't just be this siloed environment where everyone's working on their own.
Yeah, I love that. One thing I get from that. So, when you talked about trust, what I also heard there was like a true evaluation of results. Did this student actually get placed? Did this student perform? And did they advance? Right. So it's about that placement, retention, and advancement. And going back to what Clay talked about, this skills-based hiring is like, do they have the skills where I feel confident as an employer that I can place them with limited risk and they will succeed and they understand what they're getting into? And from a VR perspective from ESI is that we're giving them early introduction to the industry that's completely risk-free so that the talent can actually evaluate, is this a place for me? And the employer can feel confident that this talent that's coming to me really has evaluated that this is a place where they want to excel. So it's really on that deliverable goal focus of actual placement, retention, and advancement. And that goes back to Jared, what you said is if we have talent or student-centric solutions, and our metrics are measured by deliverables such as placement retention, that builds that layer of trust. It also creates a feedback loop where employer is talking to training provider is talking to employer, but they're both talking to talent and making sure that that talent is getting placed in the right job. And they are excited about that. And they have what we call a potential based hire as well. They've shown the potential that they are not just going there for the job, but they have the potential to excel in that industry and they're really passionate about it. So thank you for that. As always, you're very candid and I appreciate that because I think that's what we really need. And that just that topic alone of trust is something that could definitely be its own conversation for sure. And how do we do that? Speaking to that, I'm being mindful of our time. I wanted to go back to Esai. In your technology, giving people exposure to the equipment, giving people exposure to the environment, such as clean rooms, which are very unique. How do you feel, going back to this trust idea, how do you feel that builds trust across, let's say, the three stakeholders of talent, training provider, and employer?
So with the technology itself, right, what does it really provide that Jared kind of touched upon? It creates that equality and accessibility. Everyone can have access to it. It could be in underserved communities. It could be done with unemployed, underemployed, or the youth communities. It's accessible to all of those stakeholders. And it actually goes through that whole cycle of it's not only awareness, right? Can you take this into a middle school? Can you take the technology into the high school to create that awareness? Absolutely. It's actually the easiest way of doing it, right? So now you're attracting people into it. Now you're going to move into the training. It's not to replace hands-on, but it is to complement it, becoming that complementary tool. So the schools, the training providers can use it as a tool for themselves, but that trust within the industry, and like I said, we came from industry, we've trained thousands of technicians, and dealing with industry, one of the things we often hear is, yes, the community college, the training providers, they could educate someone, but they're not necessarily training that person to be ready on job one. And there's many reasons for that. More likely than not, is that the accessibility to the equipment. How do they get that real world experiences when, say, a technical school or a community college doesn't have that access to it? They don't have the equipment because, industry has the newest, best equipment because they have to stay competitive, but the community colleges will never be able to afford to stay in that type of environment, affording the equipment. So now you could actually help bridge that gap between the training providers and that industry by providing that real world experiences, providing access to what that real world equipment is going to look like to help that individual train for that industry partner directly, be it customized training or working with them much closer. So that's where you kind of start helping build that trust between industry partner and that training provider with some of that more real world scenarios and experiences that the schools can't always do. Yes, they have hands-on, but is the equipment always going to be the same? And is it going to be replicable for that job specifically?
Awesome. Thank you. All right, Clay. So as a follow-up to that, I kind of want to go shift from the innovation and also some attributes such as trust and innovation in VR and skills-based learning. I want to shift a little bit to, I guess what I would say is like the architecture. How do we support this? How does as a both a nation and regional ecosystem support these innovations that sometimes can be costly on the front end just to develop and take that risk? Learn and earn models, there's a component of trust and investment that employers often have to make, paying for the tuition, maybe paying for wraparound services, that sort of things to make sure that these apprentices and interns are successful. In some cases, there's even housing requirements. So your question is this. So community colleges, workforce partners, and employers, they often cite that federal or state dollars are really vital in incubating and accelerating these approaches that we're talking about today. But they do find that there's some barriers in how that's been done. And that could be barriers as far as awareness, like navigating where is this funding and how do I get to it? Um, Access, like the limitations on who accesses that funding and where that happens and what are the metrics they need to meet to get that access. And then finally the administration. So once you get the funding, is administering that funding also barrier because of some of the requirements with it. So I'm throwing you out on a limb here, and you can be somewhat candid here for sure, because we are looking at how do we improve the systems out there from your work at NIICA, but also with Global Foundries and also even working in education way back when. What are some ways, and I'm looking at this from like an innovation solution based, what are some ways that funding systems could be structured, possibly some innovations that would make stuff like apprenticeships and VR more resilient, responsive, and scalable for schools, talent, and employers? That's a loaded big question, but looking for any insight there.
You could have just said, talk to me about funding and how can we do that in an alternative way. Or some thoughts on that, right? So, I mean, obviously, this really gets to the heart of not only making apprenticeships and internships accessible, but scalable and sustainable over time, right? So, if you want to start thinking about, how do we think of some alternative strategies that could help shift the current model toward more of a performance-based sustainability model, right? So we've kind of mentioned this already a couple of times, but typically the funding, somebody gets a tranche of money and they got a great idea and we're gonna move that forward, and there really aren't hard metrics behind what needs to be delivered, and if it isn't delivered, what the consequence of that is, right? Are they going to continue to be funded? But if we start looking at things like, regardless of what funding and where it goes, if we start talking about things being truly performance based and saying, hey, you know what is the job placement rate? What's the retention of the employees over time? Is there a wage progression, or is somebody getting into what is essentially a dead end job, right? What's the growth prospect for the job? I mean, obviously, as a part of the education system, academic completion, credential attainment, that's always baked into the process, and it's important. Is it, from the standpoint of apprenticeship and internship, is it important for someone to have the degree first before they get to the job? Obviously, we like the earn and learn model, but there needs to be investment to do that, both by the employer and the government structure around, whether it be local, regional, federal, whatever, right? So, some other thoughts: outcome-based public-private partnerships, right? So maybe we can look at things from an employer consortia co-investing in apprenticeship programs, but with public dollars, right? So that it reduces upfront costs for everybody, right? And of course, it's based on outcomes. So employers contribute. In this case, I'm thinking employers could contribute after certain milestones are reached by apprenticeships, or by apprentices rather. Public funds get released in phases based on performance metrics. So it's not just here's millions of dollars, go. It's we'll give you X and then you prove case. So it'd be more of a tiered funding process based on maturity of a program, right? So to get it started, there's a certain number of dollars. To grow it, there's a certain number of dollars. To sustain it over time, there's a certain number of dollars, and that comes in phases. Things that people hate to talk about, but it's pay for success contracts, right? You're shifting the risk based on you're going to get paid based on success, right? So that someone's not putting up a ton of money and not knowing whether there's going to be success at the end. Obviously, there are things like tax incentives and wage subsidies which help. So if an employer can get a tax credit, so that as they hire apprentices, they get some tax benefit for that. Wage subsidies. I know this happens in a lot of places where some of the wages of the apprentices or interns is offset by a subsidy so that there's less risk for the employer. Tuition reimbursement programs, lots of employers have those. I can think of a couple of states that do the thing where they actually put in dollars for related technical instruction to be paid for using state university funding. So there's lots of ways around that, but those types of mechanisms help scale, right? They make it a little bit easier for an employer to jump in and say, yeah, I'm going to get on board with that. And then, this is the one that really, hits hard for me, is we need to figure out a way to allow the blending of funding sources from federal, state, and local funds. There's a lot of places, and I'm not going to mention any names, but there's a lot of cases where federal dollars flow down to a state, and if an employer has multiple locations nationally and they want to run one apprenticeship but do it at a national level, in that case, if they're in a state that won't fund unless you're working directly with the state, then they don't have access to those dollars, right? Even though they're federal dollars that flowed down to the state, they just don't get to access them, which to me is it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So if we're really looking to support apprenticeships, internships, and this earn and learn strategy, those funding sources need to be able to be blended, and the employers need to be able to be flexible with the way they can structure these things. And then, lastly, I'll just say funding needs to be adjusted based on real-time labor market data. All these decisions about what gets funded and where has to be based on some real data. What is the regional demand or the sector growth? What is it that's happening in that area, and why are we investing in it? Whether it's a sector or it's a region or locality or whatever. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? And what are those outcomes? What do those outcomes need to be? And that needs to be dynamic, right? As things shift, the funding needs to shift with it. Those, again, some of my thoughts, and happy to hear what other people think about that. But there needs to be some real thought that goes into how funding happens now and how it should happen in the future.
I think that's great. Yeah. So always looking towards the future, and how I heard the word dynamic towards the end of that. And I think that's exactly that. It's like looking at how we can change these funding mechanisms dynamically in response to what is needed in the industry, what is needed in skills-based hiring, what is emerging technologies that could influence that. So I do want to get to a closing piece here for all of you. And kind of limit your answer to, about a minute, I think would be great. And then we could round up with some extra questions if we have time. But as we mentioned, NIICA is actively working with our national network of partners to scale best practices in earn and learn models. That's apprenticeship, that's internship, and other work-based learning. But we're always encouraging innovation and collaboration in that context. The question I put out to you, and I'll start with you, Isai, just to get you on the spot. If you had to pick one priority to strengthen the workforce system for advanced manufacturing and tech over the next 3 to 5 years, what would that priority be?
Breaking misconceptions, I think, out there. There's just overall misconceptions about this technology as it just being a gaming system. I think there's misconceptions across the ecosystem as a whole, from a whole generation of parents that will not tell their children to go into manufacturing as a whole because of just the soot and the cleanliness that they grew up in, even though we can all talk about how their facilities are 100 times cleaner than an operating room. I think from an education side, the misconception that this technology is not for gaming and it's only hands-on and is that the only way. I think this would be a complementary tool to help accelerate. From a employer point of view, the misconceptions that there's certain criteria that have to be met for someone to get a job, as we touched upon. For us to hire, they have to have an associate's degree or they must have X degree, that there are multiple ways of alternative ways of doing it. And I think breaking those misconceptions and aligning them all together in that ecosystem would be, for me, I think the biggest thing that we all could do just across the board.
Awesome. Jared, same question. If you could pick one priority to strengthen the workforce system for advanced manufacturing and tech over the next 3 to 5 years, what would it be?
I mean, I think it's 100% student recruitment and awareness. I mean, it doesn't matter what internship, apprenticeship, or what programs we have. If we cannot recruit new students that are not thinking of going into this career, then we're going to fail, right? Like nearly all of our recruitment strategy and awareness strategies are tailored to students who are already interested in STEM or who are already interested in microelectronics. Very few of them actually are opening doors for new students. So how do we create a more effective student recruitment and awareness campaign that's going to get students who are not thinking of going into the semiconductor industry into this workforce pipeline? Because if we don't, I mean, probably exponentially or scale these numbers up of this pipeline to an immense amount, then there's no way we could fulfill the jobs that are going to be out there.
It's awesome. Thank you very much, Jared. And Clay, circle back to you on that. If you had to pick one priority to strengthen the workforce system for advanced manufacturing and tech over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, so I will concur with my counterparts here that we need to have a lot more awareness, but to do those awareness campaigns and to drive earn and learn strategies to get people into this pipeline, I'll come back to what I was just talking about from a funding perspective. We need to have data-driven decisions on what needs to be done, and the funding needs to be aligned at all levels so that it forces all of the partners to play together to drive that awareness, right? So the employers need to work with the community college, need to work with industry, need to work with other training providers like TAP 3D and ESI. Just we all need to be working together. We need to be able to put the funds in the right place so that we're doing that, and everything needs to be aligned. We can't have disparate messages. It's got to be one story driven across the entire nation, and focused regionally where the jobs are based on the data.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're at 2:58. So what I heard there, just to kind of summarize, is really is overcoming some of the misconceptions about the industry so we can attract more talent. From Jared's case is that student and talent recruitment. So students can come in right from high school into education programs, but also with the learn and earn model, they start with the job first, and then the job through apprenticeship runs them through an academic degree as well. So it's a non-traditional pathway into education. And Clay, what I heard from you is that the funding and the resources need to align with that so that we have data-driven decisions that really encourage collaboration both in a region, but also in across nationally. And that collaboration is where you're asking different partners to do their area of expertise where they really excel. TAP 3D, very clear what they're very good at. A community college is very good to see what they're good at doing. And other partners can bring in, such as NIICA can bring in the expertise of registered apprenticeships, among other things as well. And then finally, that collaboration is identifying best practices that can be shared across the entire ecosystem nationally, but also can be applied with a regional focus. So that about wraps us up. We're at 2:59. Would love to hear back from everybody that's on this call, and please share this. It will be recorded, but it's info@niica.org. Please reach out to us, and we'd love to send you a copy of the recording and also follow up with any other questions you have.